Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps.
Have you ever, I don't know, thought about how a huge intelligence agency like the CIA keeps track of, people who aren't necessarily spies, but still matter to them?
Oh, absolutely. It's a massive undertaking. Imagine trying to figure out which ripples in a pond, some small, some bigger, will turn into a wave.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we're diving into today, the deep end, of course. We're going to be looking at the CIA's 201 system, which is their way of handling, get this, personality files. And we have some declassified documents here, pretty cool stuff, from 1960 to 1974, so get a glimpse into how this system worked. And what's even cooler is what it tells us about how they, saw intelligence gathering, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating to look back at this stuff from the Cold War. Intelligence wasn't all about, classic spy stuff. It was also about trying to understand people, figuring out who might be important.
So even if you're not, cracking codes in your basement, this is relevant, right? You get to see how these big organizations label and track people, and that's something that happens in lots of areas.
For sure.
Okay, so the mission today is simple. We want to figure out, using these documents, what the heck the 201 system was, how it worked day to day, and why it was a big deal. So let's get started. The core idea here, it seems to be all about having a central place for information.
Right. Exactly. The documents show that this 201 system was, how the CIA's operations directorate, that's the part that does the sneaky stuff, how they identified, controlled, and filed info on people they considered, quote, of specific interest.
And it's important to remember that these weren't all secret agents or anything.
Oh, not at all. It could be anyone, really.
So their neighbor.
Maybe. If their activities or connections, or even just their basic info was useful to the CIA, they could end up in the system. One of the documents states it pretty clearly. It says, the 201 system provides a method for identifying a person of specific interest to the Operations Directorate and for controlling and filing all pertinent information about that person.
I see. So they were basically tagging people early on. It was like an early version of a hashtag,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
You can see how that would help them see patterns and connections. That would be really hard to find just with paper files. It's taking it a step further, moving beyond individual data points to understand networks of people. And it wasn't just about filing stuff away. It actively helped the CIA pick out people based on different categories of information. It helped them make lists of these, quote, 201 personalities.
That's a good point. It shows how proactive intelligence work can be. They weren't just waiting around for threats to pop up. They were trying to understand everything and everyone.
And get this. One of the sources says that at any given time, only a relatively small proportion of these people they were tracking were, quote, of active operational interest.
Interesting. So they were casting a wide net.
It seems like it. This included folks they were actively investigating, potential recruits, and people from groups they were keeping an eye on.
It makes sense. Intelligence work can be a long game. You might gather info on someone for years before they become useful in an operation. The 201 system was how they did that, managing all that info.
It was the infrastructure for that kind of long game.
Exactly.
And now our sources say that the 201 system did two main things. It wasn't just one thing. It was about both identifying someone AD, then gathering everything about them.
Right. It had a dual function. They give each person a unique number, which brought them into the CIA's official records. But then they'd also create a dossier, a file that had, or at least pointed to, all the info about that person.
So it was both a library card and the library itself.
I like that.
And this unique number, the 201 number, that was the key to everything, right?
Definitely. One document actually says the 201 number serves a dual purpose. It brings the files on these personalities into the CS records system. A single number, e.g. 201-123-456, is assigned to each person, and a dossier controlled by this number is established, which contains or has cross-reference to it all of the reporting on the individual's personal history, current status, and prospects.
So if you had that number, you had access to everything they knew about that person. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty. What did these 201 dossiers actually look like? Seems like they had a pretty specific layout.
Yeah, the documents break it down pretty clearly. Obviously, you had the 201 number itself, that unique ID, something like 201-123-4567.
And then there was the physical file, the actual 201 dossier. That contained the starting form, Form A3-1, and all the biographical stuff, references, reports, the whole 9 yards. So that was where all the paper lived.
Yep. But then there was also this Master 201 record. This was a card index made by a machine, which is kind of wild considering the tech back then. It was like the main index for all the 201 files, and it stored key info that they could use to make special lists. It's like a searchable index, way faster than going through tons of paper dossiers by hand.
And that index could then make what they called the main index master 201 reference, which was basically a paper printout of the results of a search. It's such an interesting mix of old school and the beginnings of digital record keeping.
It shows how they were trying to use the tech they had to deal with all this information.
Now, the stuff they actually put in a 201 dossier, it wasn't just boring facts, right?
Oh, no, not at all. They had a whole bunch of stuff in there.
Like what?
Well, they had the 201 personality file action request form, of course, detailed like photos and fingerprints, questionnaires they might have given the person, records of any operational and security approvals.
Wow, that's a lot.
And that's not all. They also had personality assessments, any letters or memos related to the person, reports on their security if they were an agent, training records, something called SGS, wear-out reports, which is pretty mysterious. Maybe the SG stands for special group, but we don't know what swirl means. And they even had things like newspaper clippings and, get this, any other relevant information.
Wow, they were really casting a wide net. That's so broad. It seems like they were gathering anything that might be useful later. One of the documents says, material which is filed in the dossier is not limited to, and then it lists a ton of examples.
They really wanted to paint a complete picture of these individuals.
So how did they start this whole process? How did they decide to open a 201 file on someone?
Well, it all started with the 201 personality file action request. That's Form 831. The desks at headquarters could start a file by filling out this form and sending it to the records maintenance section. So even with that fancy machine index, it all began with a piece of paper.
And it wasn't just the folks at headquarters who could do this, right?
Nope. Field stations could ask for files to be opened too, and they'd usually do this through a dispatch. They just had to make sure to write 201 really clearly, either in the headquarters file number box or right after the person's name in the message. It had to be obvious.
So they were like, hey, this person is 201 material. Pay attention.
Exactly.
Now, what about these OI codes? What were those all about?
Ah, yes, the OI codes. OI stands for operational interest. These were two-letter codes they used, along with the 201 records, to put people into categories based on why they were important to intelligence or if they were connected to certain groups or activities. It's like tagging people, but with a specific purpose.
So it's like a filter to help them find the right people. So like if someone was thought to be working with a foreign intelligence agency, or if the CIA was thinking about recruiting them, they'd get an OI code to show that. It's right here in the definition. A two-letter symbol used in conjunction with the 201 personality records in the 201 system to record the association of an individual with organizations or activities of operational interest.
Makes sense. It's all about organization and making connections.
And different parts of the CIA could ask for these OI codes for people they were tracking, right?
Yeah, they'd send a memo through their records management officer to the Deputy Director for Operations, the DDO, to request an OI code. It was all official, so they could be sure everyone was using the codes the same way.
So once they had a 201 file and maybe an OI code, how did they keep all that info from becoming a huge mess? There must have been a ton of paper.
Well, they filed the documents in chronological order, which is logical. That way they could see how the info about a person changed over time. And they didn't just have official documents. They also had stuff like newspaper articles that could give more background.
So it was like a timeline of their knowledge about that person.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And the person in charge of all this was the desk officer, right?
Yes, they were responsible for purging any outdated or duplicate stuff from the dossier. But, and this is important, they had to be smart about it. The document says they needed discrimination in recognizing operationally useful material. So they couldn't just throw things away. They had to think about what might still be important later.
That's a tough job. So they were like information curators.
You could say that. They had to make judgments about what to keep and what to toss.
So what kinds of things would they usually get rid of?
Well, the document mentions duplicate copies. Those initial name trace forms, Form 362 if they decided not to open a full 201 file, those little summary slips they called abstract slips, and old restriction notices if the key info was already in a newer report. Basically, they wanted to keep the dossier lean and focused.
That makes sense. It's like tidying up your desk so you can find what you need.
Exactly. The document also mentions procedures for dealing with routing slips, top-secret documents, documents waiting for action, and even how to combine info if someone was using a fake name. They had pretty detailed rules for all the tricky situations.
They thought of everything. Okay, now, besides these individual files, the 201 system could do some bigger picture stuff, right? Something about making machine listings.
Right. Because they were using that Master 201 record, the system could make lists of people based on those OI codes we talked about. So let's say they had an OI code for people connected to the KGB. They could make a list of every single person in the 201 system with that code.
That's so cool. It's like early data mining. They're looking for patterns.
Exactly. And these lists were really useful for the field stations and headquarters. They'd get lists of names and file numbers for people who were relevant to their specific areas or jobs. So if you were working on Soviet intelligence, you could get a list of everyone tagged with those Soviet-related OI codes.
So they were going beyond individual cases and looking at the bigger picture.
Exactly. They were using the tech they had to see the forest for the trees, to find connections they might have missed otherwise.
And it wasn't like everyone could see everything, right? They had a way to keep some people hidden, even within the system.
That's right. If they wanted to keep someone's info really secret, even within the CIA, they could just leave the sensitivity box blank on the Form 831. They also marked those files as part of the AK program, which stands for Advanced Knowledge Vital Records. That added an extra layer of security and made it harder for people to access the info.
So it was like a secret within a secret.
It was their way of protecting the most sensitive information.
They also had different types of 201 listings: standard, non-standard, scheduled, and special.
Which shows how flexible the system was.
You could get regular lists for keeping tabs on things, make custom lists when you need them, get reports on a schedule, or make special lists for unique operations.
They could really tailor the system to fit whatever they needed.
Now remember, these documents cover a lot of years, and it seems like their thinking about the 201 system might have changed over time. There's this document from 1973 that talks about restrictions on operational use of certain categories of individuals. That sounds like a pretty big deal.
Yeah, that's a really interesting development. It seems like they were becoming more careful about who they targeted.
Why do you think that was?
Well, this document from 1973 shows that they were starting to think differently about who they should be involved with operationally. It tells the CIA to limit or completely avoid using certain types of people in their operations. The document says the agency has been directed by U.S. governmental authority to restrict or avoid the operational use of a particular category of individuals. This change in policy, the fact that they were restricting the use of certain people, isn't just a small thing. It suggests that they were starting to realize that their actions could have negative consequences and that they needed to be more careful about who they were messing with. It makes you wonder what happened to make them change their minds.
It's like they were realizing that maybe they had gone too far in some cases.
It's possible.
So who were these people they were now being careful about?
The document gives examples like officials and employees of international organizations, people in academia, and journalists. That they included academics and journalists is interesting, don't you think? Maybe something happened, or maybe their whole view of how to interact with these groups changed. It seems like they were realizing that involving these kinds of people in secret operations could be really complicated and messy. It raises questions about the ethics of intelligence work, especially when it comes to these professions.
Yeah, it's a gray area for sure.
It definitely shows a change in how they were thinking. Maybe something specific happened, or maybe they just decided to reevaluate how they did things.
So it seems like the 201 system wasn't just some static thing. It evolved over time.
Exactly. Even well-established systems and intelligence agencies change, because of internal reviews, outside pressure, and changes in the world.
So to sum up, the 201 system seems to have been a really organized and detailed way for the CIA to manage a ton of info on people they thought were important, even if those people weren't spies.
Yes, it was a way for them to keep tabs on anyone they thought could be relevant to their operations.
They used unique identifiers, detailed files with all sorts of info, and a system of categories with those OI codes to keep everything organized and easy to find.
Exactly. It was like a central hub for intelligence on individuals, designed to make it easier to identify people, put all the pieces together, and use that intelligence effectively. And the fact that they were already using some form of machine indexing, even back then, is pretty amazing. It was a big step forward in how they handled and analyzed information.
It's pretty incredible how organized they were, even back then.
It was a different era, but the core challenges of intelligence work remain the same.
Now, thinking about how detailed and organized this 201 system was, what do you think it tells us about what was important to a major intelligence agency during the Cold War? And how do you think these kinds of systems have changed in today's digital world, where there's so much more information and it moves so much faster?
Those are great questions. The 201 system definitely shows how much they focused on information. They wanted to understand people and their connections, even if those people weren't immediately important to an operation.
They were playing the long game.
Exactly. And even though the tools and technology are totally different today, the basic need to identify, categorize, and manage information about people hasn't changed. But now there's way more data, and it's way more complex.
It makes you think about data security, privacy, and all the ways that info can be misused.
Absolutely. The potential for abuse is a huge concern.
It really makes you think about how governments and organizations handle all the information they have on people these days. If you want to learn more about this, you could check out declassified documents about the CIA's record keeping, or read some scholarly stuff about intelligence gathering during the Cold War.
Understanding the history of systems like the 201 system can give you a lot of insight into how intelligence practices have changed and the challenges of managing information effectively to achieve national security goals.
It's a fascinating and complex topic.
For sure.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive today. We hope you found it interesting and informative.
It was a pleasure to be here.
We hope you learned something new about the history of intelligence practices.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.